have already met, some other don't, but we have people here from all over Brazil connected here.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And again, I'm very sorry to keep you waiting. Should I maybe just set up my PowerPoint and send my screen to you guys?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay. Let me. You know, I've got my. This is in Portuguese, so I may have some trouble.
Okay, in your screen, the left side of the screen, there are some icons, and you are going to find a green icon.
Okay.
With an arrow. Okay, you hit that, and you can share your screen.
Okay, let me see if.
Perfect. You are sharing.
Does that work?
Yes.
Okay. It moves.
Yes.
When I move it. Okay. Wonderful. And now, since I have this screen up, I can't see any of your faces. But I think that it's probably best if. So there's probably no need for you to turn on your video.
Yes, okay. We will shut down the videos, and then we can turn on. If we start some discussion at the end, we can start up the videos. Okay, guys, shut down the video so we have more bandwidth too.
Okay. So, thank you all for coming this morning or this evening for you, and we've been now, this is our third session together. We talked about Kyozawa Manshi the first time, and then Soga Ryojin the second time, and today I want to talk about Akegarasu Haya and his life, tell you the story of his life. Akegarasu Haya, last time we saw Soga Ryojin, who was very important in the sort of doctrinal studies aspect of the the academic aspect of the denomination of the Otaniha, but Akegarasu Sensei was far more important, not really in the academic realm, but in the realm of teaching. He was a preacher who spent a great deal of his life traveling throughout Japan, giving lectures, and it was that giving lectures at temples and at other places, sort of Dharma talks, and also writing books directed at the general populace, at the Shin followers. So that's sort of the direction. His focus was not entirely academic and more focused on proselytization. So I want to today sort of go through Akegarasu's life, and we can break it up into 6 periods. The first, his youth and education. The second, the Kokodo period, which is where he lived in Tokyo and first studied under Kyozawa Manshi, and then after Kyozawa Manshi's passing, sort of became a leader of this movement that Kyozawa started, the Seishin Shugi movement. But ultimately, that period ends with the death of his wife and a crisis that was brought about by the death of his wife and a few other problems that we'll talk about. But that led to a major reevaluation of his understanding of Amida and also of his understanding of faith, the nature of faith. And it's this crisis that is probably the central part of today's talk, the crisis and the rebirth, or the awakening that he had, is what I want to focus on mostly today. And so after that comes a period of rediscovery of the world, where Akenasu goes outside of Japan and travels, really travels the world, and begins to discover, well, his Japaneseness, and the fact that he is, when he's out in the world, he is constantly having to refer to himself as a Japanese person, and that those trips lead him to start considering the significance of Japan, and also the significance of Japanese mythology. And this period coincides with the war period. This rediscovery of Japan and its myths coincides pretty much entirely with the period where Japan is going into the Second World War, and under this sort of Tennosei or emperor-centric mythology. And Akigarasu very much sort of participates in that process, and we'll talk more about that later. And then at the end of his life, after the war ends, Akigarasu engages and makes great contributions to particularly rebuilding the denomination and revitalizing the denomination in the post-war period, and in the sort of difficult period after the war, when the denomination was struggling. He played a central role in sort of revitalizing it, and also setting it on the track that it continues on today. So we'll talk about that at the end. So let's move through these 6 periods one at a time. And I should say, I have to teach at about, well, at 10:30. So, and since I'm running late, I'm sorry, but I'll probably have to end here at about 10 or 10:15, and then, well, maybe I'll aim to end at about 10, and then we'll do maybe a little bit of question and answer, and then we can wrap up by about 10:20 so that I can move to my next class. I hope that's all right.
Okay, no problem. No problem.
Okay. Okay, so let's start with Akigarasu's youth and education. We can talk first about some of Akigarasu's similarities with Soga Sensei. He's only 2 years younger than Soga Sensei, so very similar. They're born into very similar situations, and very different situations from Kiyozawa. Kiyozawa, who was born in the Bakumatsu period, or before the Meiji Restoration. The Japan that Kiyozawa was born into was very different and very much more unstable than the Japan that Akigarasu and Soga were born into. You know, we saw how Kiyozawa, he ended up going through a variety of different schools, different educational institutions, because the Japanese educational system was very much in flux while Kiyozawa was a boy, whereas Akigarasu and Soga, the education system had stabilized, and the Higashi Honganji had managed to build a nationwide set of schools for training its ministers. And Akigarasu, like Soga, was born into a temple family, which meant that he was expected to take over the temple, and therefore was expected to, you know, be educated within the denomination and to become ordained at an early age, and ultimately to take over the temple. Okay, so we'll move on to Akigarazu's birth and early education. He was born in a place called Kitayasuda in Ishikawa Prefecture, as the first son of a temple family, which means that he was expected to be the next resident minister of that temple. Ishikawa Prefecture is a very strong Shin influenced area. In the pre-Edo period, during the Warring States period, Ishikawa was actually run by Shin followers. It was independent, and really the Shin denomination was running the prefecture, running it was a han at that time, a domain at that time. So a very, very strong Shin area. They say that if you dig in the ground, the Nembutsu comes out of the ground there, because the Shin followers there were always chanting the Nembutsu while they were, tilling the fields, while they were in the fields planting the rice. They were always chanting the Nembutsu, so if you dig in the ground, their Nembutsu comes out. So in a very nurturing environment, and his parents were also very serious Shin followers. His father was, it seems, sort of a how do you say, a bit eccentric, a little bit strange, but also very well respected in the community and among the fellow ministers in the area. And however, the temple that he was born into was a very small temple with a limited number of followers, and that meant that the temple was not very economically stable. He was pretty much poor through most of his childhood, and the temple was, the family was struggling economically through his childhood. And he entered the village elementary school. This is around the time that elementary schools were being built throughout Japan as part of the national compulsory education system. And actually, this village elementary school was first originated in the temple where Akigarasu was born, and only later ended up moving into a building across the street. In these early days, the government relied on temple facilities sort of as a how do you say, space for schooling. But so Akigarasu was very much close to his elementary school. He pretty much grew up in the elementary school. But soon after, probably in his second or third year, the elementary school became its own independent building, and but still very much the school and the temple were in close proximity, both in space, and I think that his mother actually taught at the elementary school for a while. And in Japan, up until the Meiji period, temples played sort of a central role in education of the populace, and this Akigarasu is in this period where the education of the populace is shifting from the responsibility of temples to the responsibility of the government and public education. And so he was educated in first, well, in the public elementary school, but at that public elementary school was sort of moving away from the temple, or it was just starting to be, how do you say, independent of the temple at the time. And unfortunately, when Akigarasu is still very young, only 10 or 11 years old, his father passes away, leaving he and his mother alone in the temple with his father's two younger brothers. And evidently, Akigarasu's two uncles were not not the best of people. They evidently were interested in sort of using the temple for their own personal gain and their own personal purposes, such that the environment that Akigarasu was living in after his father passed away was a very tense one. I don't know, his uncles were sort of, well, irresponsible people. And irresponsible, selfish people, and that created a very tense and difficult situation for his mother, who, from the stress of having to sort of keep the temple together with these two difficult people, ends up being hospitalized for close to a year when Akigarasu is only 12. So this was kind of a formative period here for Akigarasu. And he really, his father and his mother and, well, sort of the he's always remembering how much his mother did for him to make it possible for him to be educated and for him to become the minister that he eventually became. And this young, when he was this young formative period, left him, how do you say, very much sentimental about his father, and also very grateful to his mother. But he ultimately entered the middle school, which today would be considered a high school, which was sort of public and private, cooperated by the Kanazawa, by the Ishikawa prefecture, and also the Otaniha denomination in 1889, and goes to Kyoto to get ordained in 1891. Ultimately, this is, you know, as a young high school student, about 15 years old, he decides that English education will be the ruin of Japan, and, you know, argues that one should focus on Japanese education and not be focusing on bringing in this English language education into Japan, which, you know, it's hard to say. I think part of what I think a big part of it was that he just wasn't interested in studying English, and was looking for a reason not to study English. Although this stance ultimately ended up leading him to drop out of Kanazawa Middle School in February of 1893. And that led to, so he, for about 6 months, then in Ishikawa, he lived at his family temple, and since he was ordained, he was starting to do family temple duties. But at this time, the denomination made a rule that you needed to have a middle school education to be able to be the resident minister of a temple. And so Akegarasu, in this 1893, he studies under several people, several other ministers in his area, and ultimately hears about the creation of this new middle school in Kyoto, the denomination's middle school in Kyoto, which Kiyozawa was at the time the president, or the head, the president of. And actually this, I talked about how Kiyozawa, at one point, in 1893, Kiyozawa quits his position as the head of the middle school and ends up just teaching at the middle school as an English teacher. And Akegarasu reflects, he often talks about his first encounter with Kiyozawa, and Kiyozawa in his hemp robes, his hemp monk's robes, coming into the classroom, and this is during Kiyozawa's minimum possible period, where Kiyozawa was doing experiments with ascetic practices. So a very, how do you say, stern and simple-looking Kiyozawa entered the room, and Akegarasu thought, so what is this guy going to teach us? Is he going to be a Confucian classic teacher? Is he going to teach something about the Buddhist tradition? And no, instead Kiyozawa is teaching English, this English that Akegarasu refused to study, which is kind of an ironic way to encounter Kiyozawa, who would ultimately become a very important teacher for Akegarasu as time goes on. And I guess that in this first class, Kiyozawa asked Akegarasu to translate a passage, and since Akegarasu had refused to study English up to this point, he just answered in a very loud voice, I can't, I don't know how to read it, which surprised Kiyozawa, but also sort of endeared Kiyozawa to Akegarasu, and ultimately Akegarasu does start studying English, and Kiyozawa and Akegarasu develop a very close relationship over the course of his time in middle school. And also another major aspect of his time in middle school in Kyoto was his encounter, or his development of a very close friendship with Sasaki Gesho and Tada Kanae, who we met when we talked about Kiyozawa, and these two are very central figures in the Kokodo movement. That they're, you know, Akegarasu's closest friends and also his closest compatriots in bringing about, in creating this new movement under Kiyozawa's guidance. So also at this time in 1895, if you'll remember, Kiyozawa was beginning a major denominational reform movement. He and Akegarasu participated in this as a student. He did a variety of activities going around the country to sort of spread Kiyozawa's message, and also being, you know, helping bring together students in the middle school to help Kiyozawa's movement. So, and this is sort of continuing here. In 1890, 6, he graduates from middle school and moves into the newly created Shinshu University in 1896. And part of this denominational reform movement, there was a great deal of back and forth between the students at the university and the university itself and the denomination, which meant that these next couple years for Akigarasu, as a student, he was expelled and goes back to school, gets expelled, or quits school, goes back to school. That there's a variety of going back and forth over this these early years of his higher education, all tied up in this denominational reform movement, which is aiming, Kiyozawa and Kiyozawa's supporters were calling for a major reform of the denomination's educational institutions and the program for education, sort of a revitalization of doctrinal studies and a reconfirmation that doctrinal studies, new and modern doctrinal studies, should be central to the denomination's activities. Over against sort of a more traditionalist, not really even in terms of doctrinally traditionalist, more in terms of organizationally traditionalist group, who was less interested in doctrinal issues and more interested in keeping the flow of funds into the denomination's coffers going well, keeping the denomination well funded. And so Kiyozawa's reform movement gains a great deal of support with the help of Akigarasu and many of the students at the Shinshu University. Also at this time, I have here discovery of the Tanisho, which Akigarasu at this time, he is, about 20. He's just turning, 19 or 20, and at this time, there was what was called the Buddhist Puritan movement going on, where an idea that Buddhists needed to be morally pure, and Akigarasu very much internalized that message and started to struggle with his sexual desires, and very much felt a deep sense of guilt over his sexual desires, and also over his indulgence in such activities. And he turned to the Tanisho and to the Tanisho's representation of Amida as a savior of the evil and defiled human beings, as a sort of solace, or as a source of solace, or a source of peace of mind in those struggles with his desires. And even though he read the Tanisho, he says later, looking back on this period, that he would read the Tanisho in tears over his sadness, over his weakness, and read it over and over again, and also in tears of gratitude for Amida's original vow, which was made particularly to save such a weak sinner as myself. And this this view of the Tanisho, ultimately, we'll see it later on, that it ultimately changes and sort of falls apart. This view of Amida as an external savior for a deeply sinful person. That understanding of liberation, or that understanding of salvation in Shin Buddhism, shifts over time, especially in his in this period of crisis. But we'll look at that when we get to it. So he, in 1897, this is he becomes the editor of Mujinto, which was a journal that was put out by Otani University. It was the main journal, or the main organ of expression for the faculty and student body at Otani University. And Akegarasu becomes editor here, and it's as editor of Mujinto that he sort of learns the skills for editing that would ultimately become very important in his role in the Seishinkai publication under Kiyozawa. And he graduates from university in 1900 and gets a bit, here again, takes a bit of a turn in his life. He doesn't want to go back to his temple, and he gets the idea that he should become a foreign minister, a diplomat, or an ambassador, that he should work to become an ambassador, and as an ambassador or as a diplomat, work to spread Buddhism throughout the world, and to spread the Buddhist spirit throughout the world. And so he manages to get the support of the denomination to start studying Russian at the Tokyo Foreign Language Academy in September of 1900. But in fact, this his time here, he only goes to classes, to Russian classes, for about 3 or 4 months. And in September of 1900, he also he takes up residence at the Kokodo with Kiyozawa. And ultimately, Kiyozawa was always opposed to this idea that Akegarasu become a diplomat. Kiyozawa didn't think that that was the best use of Akegarasu's skills, or really what Akegarasu should be doing. So in the face of Kiyozawa's opposition, and also in the busyness of working on editing Seishinkai, ultimately this desire to become a diplomat sort of fades away. But Akegarasu's view, this view towards the world, right? This idea that Buddhism and the spirit of Buddhism needs to be spread throughout the world, and that the spirit of Buddhism is really the source of salvation, not just for Japan, but for the world as a whole, was something that informed his entire career. It was something that really goes through to the end of his life. And he also, in September of 1900, he's installed as the Jushoku, the resident minister of Myotatsuji. Although he is the resident minister, he does not reside at Myotatsuji. He doesn't actually live at Myotatsuji. He instead leaves most of the daily work of the temple to his mother and his uncles, and takes up residence in Tokyo with Kiyozawa in what ultimately becomes called the Kokodo. So let's move on to the second period of his life. In 1900, Kiyozawa had been removed from his position he had his ministerial certification revoked. He was essentially defrocked for his attempt to reform the denomination. And in 1900, he is reinstalled as a minister and is sent to Tokyo to set up this new denominational university. Although he was first punished for his involvement in the reform movement, ultimately the reform movement that he set in motion, the changes that the reform movement set in motion led to some new people being installed, some new and more sympathetic people being installed in the denomination's administration, and those people then encouraged Kiyozawa to pursue his plans for reform of the educational institutions, the major reform of which was the creation of this Shinshu University in Tokyo, which we talked about. I have the Three Crows plans for the Kokodo here. The Three Crows are, this in Japanese it's the Sambagarasu, the three crows, which is Sasaki Gesho, Tadakane, and Akegarasu Sensei. And Akegarasu, the name Akegarasu means dawn crow or crow at dawn. So people that call these three the Three Crows, sort of taking the character from Akegarasu's name. And they had plans for the Kokodo. Akegarasu, his experience at Mujinto led him to realize the importance of publication for spreading this Buddhist message, and these three younger people, just graduated from university, so just in their early 20s, they had this idea to create a new movement, a new spiritual religious movement in line with the spirit of the day, and also a movement that would not use the traditional doctrinal terminology, but would use more direct and immediate terminology to discuss Shin faith or Shin awakening, Shin liberation. And they brought these plans to Kiyozawa, and Kiyozawa accepted the plans and accepted their request that he serve in a leadership role in this new movement. So Kiyozawa was living, he was given this fairly large house to live in Tokyo while he was laying his plans for the Shinshu University, and also teaching the Monshu to be, or the next Monshu, who was at the time studying in Tokyo as well. Or Hosu, not Monshu, Hosu, the next head of the denomination, who is descendant of Shinran. Akigarasu serves for a long time as editor of Seishinkai, and sort of is given a great deal of leeway in Kiyozawa's by Kiyozawa to sort of shape the message of what is called Seishin Shugi, or this spiritual awareness, this movement for spiritual awareness, such that today there are people who argue that much of Kiyozawa's works that appeared in this journal Seishinkai were heavily rewritten by Akigarasu, such that much of Kiyozawa's thought, what we think of today as Kiyozawa's thought, was actually additions and expansions by Akigarasu. But that's sort of another story. But to that extent, Kiyozawa was trusting Akigarasu. There's an episode where Kiyozawa's teacher from Tokyo Imperial University, having read an article that Kiyozawa wrote in Seishinkai, Kiyozawa by this time was very ill, and so he wasn't able to go in person to respond to his teacher's questions or concerns with this article that he had published, but he gave Akigarasu Sensei a letter of introduction saying, you can trust anything that this man says as my thought, which shows the extent to which Kiyozawa was trusting, and the extent to which Kiyozawa gave Akigarasu sort of license to express Kiyozawa's ideas. And also this, in the Seishinkai, Akigarasu starts publishing lectures on the Tanisho, which which is a major work in popularizing the Tanisho. And I think everybody, generally people who in the West who come in contact with Shin Buddhism tend to start through the Tanisho, or at least very early on get in touch with the Tanisho. And however, the role of the Tanisho in Shin Buddhism has been sort of a, how do you say, ambivalent one through much of Shin history. And it's really a modern phenomenon based on these lectures on the Tanisho that Akigarasu published, and a few other modern thinkers' considerations of the Tanisho, that the Tanisho became really popular in Japan, and popular, understood as a clear representation of Shinran's thought. So this rediscovery of the Tanisho, or popularization of the Tanisho, and a new, how do you say, making the Tanisho sort of a central text in Shin Buddhism, was something that Akigarasu played a major role in. Kiyozawa's work at, as we saw a few months ago, his work at the university did not go as planned. He returned to his home temple in November of 1902. So after about 2 years of living together with Akigarasu and Tarakanae and the other members of the Kokodo, Kyozawa goes to his home temple and ultimately never comes back. He passes away in June of the next year. And Akigarasu also at this time he marries Yamada Fusako, who is Sasaki Gesho's younger sister, and who comes to live with Akigarasu, and who also works to support the Akigarasu's temple in Ishikawa. Kyozawa passes away in June of 1903, and Akigarasu talks about some of the changes or some of the things that occurred after Kyozawa's passing. In his reflections, maybe these are reflections from about 1915. And he says, you know, I work to tell the world of your name, your virtues, and your teachings. I blustered greatly about reforming Buddhism and recreating the Japanese spiritual world. And in those years, after Kyozawa passed away, Akigarasu essentially went all over the country preaching, and to the extent that it seemed that a Kyozawa school would come about. And December fan memorials, these rosenki, or memorials for Kyozawa, came to be held throughout Japan, and Kyozawa's final work that he was published in Seishinkai just after Kyozawa passed away was read over and over again throughout the country. And at the same time, you know, people, this new movement, and Akigarasu was very much an emotional speaker and very much a bold speaker, to the extent that he was heavily criticized by people around him, and ultimately there became a question of heresy. But at the same time, Akigarasu sort of says that he, as much as he tried to present Kyozawa's spirit, he ultimately reflects that during this period he had gotten Kyozawa's message wrong, and that he, in spite of respecting Kyozawa a great deal, his attempts to spread Kyozawa's message were problematic. You know, he calls himself, as it says here, the leader of a group of merchants of religion, people who sort of missed Kyozawa's central point and were instead sort of selling Kyozawa, and not sending Kyozawa's authentic message. And this comes to this mistake, what Akigarasu sees as his mistaken understanding of Kyozawa's message, is heavily related to this idea of oncho shugi, or this idea of grace, this idea of gracism, or the centrality of Amida's grace, which is something that Akigarasu pulled out of reading the Tanisho. And I have a few passages here from Akigarasu's lectures on the Tanisho, or Tanisho Kowa, that talk about just how very important Akigarasu saw the Tanisho to be. And here, you know, he he says, even today when something sad happens, when something painful happens, when something depresses me, I always take out this work and read it. Therefore, for me, this work, Tanisho, is the voice of the Tathagata. There are many Buddhist scriptures, but among them, the most instructive for me, the one that is most comforting for me, is this Tanisho. And, you know, I mentioned Akigarasu, he takes solace in the Tanisho as, and, you know, he finds the Tanisho as something that sets his mind at ease, in that it preaches salvation of the sinner, in that it preaches that someone who is as how do you say, who is makes many mistakes, even such people who is harmful to those around him, who is moved by his animalistic desires, such a person, even such a person, is still the object of Amida Buddha's vow, Amida Buddha's original vow, and therefore the object of liberation. And this is so very much a source of gratitude for him. So when he feels bad about himself and feels bad about his situation, he reads the Tanisho, and from the Tanisho reawakens a sense of gratitude. And this understanding of the Tanisho, as I said, Akigarasu can be a bit bold in his statements. So he goes so far as to say that, you know, if I just have this one copy of the Tanisho, I can do without any other book, any other scripture, any other treatise or commentary. He even says that I would not care even if someone were to show that what is written in the Tanisho was not actually the opinion of the historical Shinran. You know, it's the Shinran of the Tanisho that I revere, and the other, any other Shinran is totally unrelated to me, which you know, is a very bold statement. And here I've got a quote from this lectures on the Tanisho that sort of show what Akigarasu was seeking for out of the Tanisho, right? And what Akigarasu was seeking was essentially an Amida Tathagata that becomes a basis of reliance and a source of power for unreliable beings, and sort of a salvific feature of salvific, a salvific force that will save even the worst people, thieves, murderers, arsonists, drunkards, rapists, upright ones, virtuous ones, evil ones, foolish ones. Someone, Amida, as a savior that will save anyone. And although, you know, Amida's vow is very much focused on liberation of all sentient beings, and does not create any sort of, how do you say, conditions, any sort of moral conditions for liberation. Akigarasu comes to recognize that this view of the Amida as a salvific, external salvific figure, right? A figure that will liberate sentient beings, will liberate or will save the evil persons will save the evil persons if evil people have faith in the working of the vow. That Akigarasu comes to see that there is a limit in that, and we'll see that in a few minutes. But at this time, during this period, in the Kokodo period, Akigarasu spreads this message of salvation through the grace of Amida, is sort of this message that Akigarasu is sending during the Kokodo period. And he preaches all over the country. He publishes several books. There are some questions about heresy, about his thought. He's charged that there's people in Ishikawa Prefecture, several ministers in Ishikawa Prefecture who heard him and some of his followers preaching, raised the issue that perhaps Akigarasu has gone too far and is moving away from true Shin orthodoxy. But ultimately, that those doubts end up getting resolved by about 1912. And it's around this time, well, in 1911, that Shinshu University that Kyozawa founded is disbanded. The Kokodo members of the Kokodo, the sort of central members of the Kokodo, sort of start moving around the country, get sent back, go back to their home temples, or go to Kyoto, so that this really strong central spiritual movement that Akigarasu had been a major part of starts falling apart and starts sort of spinning apart in 1911, 1912, 1913. And it's at this time that both Akigarasu and several of the other Kokodo members begin to see that just saying, wow, I'm really grateful for Amida working things out for me. Amida has, worked things out for me just the way that I wanted them to be worked out. So I'm really grateful for Amida. They come to see this problem with that sort of an understanding of Amida's working, because things stopped going their way. I talked about this a bit with Soga as well, but we can really feel grateful when things are going our way. We can really feel grateful for what we have received when we are receiving what we want to receive. But when we don't, when life gives us those things that we don't want to receive, it's very difficult to then feel grateful and to say, this too is the working of Amida. And Akigarasu's period of crisis is brought about by a series of events where things really stopped going his way. And the start of this period of crisis really begins with his wife's illness. And his wife takes ill in September of 1912 and has a very, very painful period of illness, so that for she was essentially in agony, suffering from September through to January when she passes away. And Akigarasu, he writes extensively about her passing, and she really struggled in passing away, and it was not a peaceful death, but instead a very painful experience for her. And Akigarasu, watching his wife pass away, he began to wonder why this person who worked so hard for him and who worked so hard for spreading the message of Buddhism had what was given such a painful ending. And it's that doubt there that sort of came to his mind with the passing of his wife, with watching his wife, struggle to breathe and struggle to breathe over the course of days as she passed away. That doubt that rose up in his mind, that this was the first sign, or the first sign that perhaps just deciding that one is grateful and thinking that if I believe in Amida, Amida will take care of my life for me. Amida will make my life a comfortable life, the life that I want. Amida will give me the life that I want. That he began to see that maybe Amida does not actually work in that way, and that perhaps his idea that having faith in Amida would then lead to Amida's gifts, the gift of various mundane benefits or daily benefits, the gift of a good life would not necessarily, that was not necessarily the true Shin message. And at the same time, Akigarasu, he also came to recognize sort of the depth of his sinfulness and the depth of his, well, I guess, so as his wife is passing away, Akigarasu, in his heart of hearts, he vows to never sleep with another woman again, to become a celibate monk, to become a celibate minister, and to love his wife forever, to keep this love of his wife that he had forever in his heart, and to never love another woman. And that very deep, intense, and sincere wish, within a week of his wife's passing, falls away into nothing. It disappears completely, and Akigarasu ultimately starts having a relationship, a sexual relationship, with the woman that they had hired to serve as her nurse, as his wife's nurse, as she was in the last stages of her illness. And this, Akigarasu could no longer, based on this relationship, see himself as a good person. He could no longer see himself as a good or right person. And at the same time, in this process, he the work of the Kokodo was also the funding that they had for Seishinkai, for the publication of the Seishinkai, was they ceased receiving funding from the denomination, and the subscriptions for Seishinkai started falling off, so that it was becoming more and more difficult to continue the publication activities. And he himself was busy with his home temple activities and could not give the energies that he had once been able to devote to the publication and the kokodo. He could no longer give those energies, and at the same time he started being blackmailed by this nurse that he had a relationship with. There was still a very, how do you say, a very strong sense that ministers should be morally upright, and this idea that that he had taken up a relationship with his wife's nurse was something that he did not want publicized. So for a time he was paying his wife's nurse hush money, but ultimately she went to one of the major religious newspapers in Japan and published an expose on the relationship, which led to him having to give up pretty much everything. He was, at the time, a very famous preacher and a very important figure in the denomination, and the publication of this expose led to his ostracization. He was, he lost most of his support from other members of the denomination. People stopped asking him to come to speak at his temple. He was criticized as a hypocrite, criticized as sort of a unrighteous, unreligious person, and this led to this, the depths of despair for Akegarasu, and it's in the depths of this despair. I mean, nothing is going his way, right? He has absolutely nothing to be grateful for. He thinks of suicide often. And this is clearly something that he brought upon himself, right? It's something that he brought upon himself. So, he is the one that created this relationship. He is the one that started sleeping with his wife's nurse. And so he had nowhere to run, no one else to blame, and no Buddha was coming to save him from the outside. And so he talks about the sort of falling away of this external savior, and this Dr. Haneda quotes this in Dharma Breeze, in his book Dharma Breeze, at the beginning of it. I think it's in the second chapter. He quotes this passage that says, once I believed that the power beyond self meant the Buddha's power, and that we were going to be saved by the external power of Amida Buddha. But when my soul experienced a deep crisis, the Buddha who was standing before me disappeared, and I became helpless, unable to rely on anything. Then, out of my desperate desire that something be done, there appeared the self. A Buddha did not appear. People did not appear. The self shouted powerfully, "O myself, O myself." The self did not shout, "O God." The self shouted, "O myself." Its voice told me, "Don't shout, O God. Don't shout, O Buddha. Live your true life and shout, O myself." So this in the depths of this crisis, Akegardasu did not discover some external savior who was going to solve the problem for him or give him what he wants. He discovered himself, himself standing there naked, essentially, and having created his situation, but also having the power, a self that could face that situation, that did not have to run away from that situation. And that led him to a reevaluation of what Buddhahood was, what the content of Shakyamuni's awakening was. You know, it's likely that in his view, in his initial view of Buddhahood, Amida would ultimately make him into a good person, and this would be something, you know, at the end of his life. Amida would, in this life, take good care of him, and at the end of his life, would assure him of Buddhahood, would assure that this sort of a sinner would necessarily become a truly pure and good Buddha. So within Akegardasu, there was this sense that he as a sinner was something that could not be a Buddha. He as a sinner was something that needed to be transformed by Amida's working into a Buddha. And so he saw a great distinction, or a great difference between himself as a sinner and the Buddha. But he, in this period of crisis, Akegardasu turns to rereading Shakyamuni's biography. And in rereading Shakyamuni's biography, he reconsiders or reevaluates what the content of Shakyamuni's awakening was. And he comes to this conclusion that Shakyamuni's awakening was an awakening not to some light of Buddhahood and not to some light of perfection, but to the limited, dark, ignorant nature of his self. And Shakyamuni's recognition of the darkness within his being, or the ignorance within his being. So he says here, as a result of carefully looking, and if you remember the story of Shakyamuni's enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, Shakyamuni has this fight with Mara, right, with these devils, these evil beings, or these, well, they're essentially symbols for our blind passions, for our various passions, and the way that Shakyamuni's enlightenment experience is described in scripture is that Shakyamuni had this fight with Mara, with these sort of personified passions, and he ended up winning this fight. And Akegardasu says that Shakyamuni's awakening was an awakening of saying, the darkness of ignorance. And it's in this recognition of the darkness of ignorance that his ignorance becomes, or is transformed into wisdom, into a true and genuine insight. But he says, and this is an important point, that this ignorance does not disappear in the usual sense of disappearing. So Shakyamuni cannot say, the light, because by saying, the light is ultimately um, a statement coming out of ignorance. It's only by saying, ah, the ignorance, that one has true insight, in that one is truly in the light, in touch with the light of wisdom, or the light of awakening. And he says, for a long time I wondered what Shakyamuni's original enlightenment was, and I couldn't tell, but now I see that on this moment of awakening, Shakyamuni came to a deep insight into the depth of his ignorance. And if you think that Shakyamuni's enlightenment was enlightenment into the 12 links of the chain of dependent origination, you'll remember that the first link in the chain, the first fundamental link in the 12 links, is actually ignorance. So Shakyamuni's Akegarasu's understanding of Shakyamuni's enlightenment as awakening to ignorance is very much in line with that sort of that traditional representation of Shakyamuni's enlightenment experience. So the darkness of ignorance is to recognize one's own darkness, and when that thought opens up, the devil that one had been staring at, that seeing one's blind passions as something to be destroyed, as something to be removed, as something standing against one, is not the devil, but indeed one's naturally occurring self, the self that flows up naturally. And therefore, defeating the devil means becoming the devil oneself. In that sense, Shakyamuni's initial thought on attaining enlightenment is the insight that I am the devil. And this is, Akegarasu's, this is the epitome of Akegarasu's sort of re-evaluation of Shin Buddhism and understanding of the his shift in understanding of what true awakening is. And it's Amida's liberation, liberation through the power of the vow, is liberation that leads to an awakening to the fact that one is indeed to this insight that I am the devil, and also leads to the recognition that that naturally occurring self, is in fact the working of the original vow, and that the natural working out of those blind passions, the natural working out of those blind passions is none other than Buddhahood itself. And this is, very much present in Shinran's thought. Shinran talks about how in the Shoshinge, Shinran says that fully knowing and understanding and realizing completely that nirvana is none other than samsara, that one can attain nirvana without cutting off blind passions. This insight is a very critical part of Shin insight, and it is really the central liberative insight, but it's also a very delicate one, and that's where this Akegarasu's qualification that gone is not in the usual sense of disappearing, because it can lead this awakening can lead to a sort of sense of self-justification and a sense of, you know, I can do anything that I want, a sort of very arrogant, very, how do you say, selfish, arrogant, and hurtful justification for a very arrogant, hurtful, self-centered self. And that, of course, is not what Shinran or what Akigarasu are laying out. But again, I don't really have either the time or the skill right now to be able to lay that out very well. And so I just want to maybe take another 5 minutes to talk about Akigarasu after this period of crisis. You know, he reemerges onto the religious scene in the late teens and starts publishing the results of this introspection and this sort of rebirth and this renewed understanding of Shin Buddhism. And it's in this shift that in this process, Akigarasu moves from a focus on the Tanisho to a focus on the larger sutra, and starts to see that the Tanisho, the message in the Tanisho, needs to be reread through the message and the story of Hozo Bosatsu, or the story of Dharmakara Bodhisattva in the larger sutra. So there's a major shift from this emphasis on the Tanisho to an emphasis on the larger sutra in Akigarasu's works at this time. And Akigarasu goes and rediscovers the world and also rediscovers Japan. He travels throughout the country, and you can see here, not throughout the country, but throughout the world. He goes to India, Palestine, Egypt, all over Europe, Korea, China, also visits the US and Hawaii. And this period forces him to re-evaluate the role of Japan and Japan himself as a Japanese person. And he starts reading Japanese mythology. Here you've got the Kojiki, which is a central text of Japanese mythology. And he starts research into that, and much of his proselytization in the 1930s sort of links up with the war, the pro-war activities, and he really by the beginning of the Pacific War in December 1941, he becomes a very staunch supporter of the war activities, and very much, you know, sort of brings together the Shinto mythology with Shinran's thought, and you know, heavily encourages people to well, not just engage in war on the battlefield, but also to engage in spreading this state ideology throughout the world as sort of the liberation, or the source of salvation for the world. And this is a very delicate issue that, to be honest, I'm still confused as to how to deal with. And then in the post-war period, Akigarasu again takes this stance. Well, he works heavily for the revitalization of Japan and revitalization of the Otaniha in the post-war period, there were a great many problems, mainly the problem of immense debt facing the denomination after the war. And Akigarasu, at the end of his life, he becomes the chief administrator of the denomination and begins this fellowship life movement, which is the source of the Dobokai movement. Mauricio has stayed at the Dobokai Con, and I imagine that some of you will come and visit the Honzan and stay there. And that whole movement where people come and visit the head temple and clean, engage in service at the head temple, and also listen to the teachings was a movement started by Akigarasu here in 1951 as part of his sort of trying to reorganize or revitalize the denomination. And he manages to, he goes throughout the country giving lectures, giving Dharma talks, and manages to repay all of the debt within a year based on donations that he was able to drum up by going from temple to temple, meeting person after person and asking for their support. In the last years of his life, he creates, he builds a building. In the last year of his life, he collects money and builds a building at Myotatsuji where Kiyozawa Sensei, there's a statue of Kiyozawa in the center. Akigarasu is kneeling with his hands in gasho before, there's a statue of Akigarasu as well, kneeling in gasho before Kiyozawa, sort of enshrining that teacher-student relationship. And the month that Dosendo is completed, Akigarasu passes away. Okay, and so I have the last few minutes. We're pretty quick, and I don't know. Maybe can we take just a couple seconds for maybe 5 or 10 minutes for questions?
Yes, great. First of all, thank you very much for this. It was very interesting. Akigarasu is always a complex character.
Yes.
And if anybody else has some question, please go ahead. I have a couple of them here, but I would like to open this for the rest of you. Thais or Iker or Hernan, anybody, please, if you have any questions. If you want to talk in Portuguese, I can translate, and then after that, after the lecture, I can translate back to you. Eu posso, se vocês quiserem fazer a pergunta em português, eu posso transmitir para ele em inglês, e depois eu traduzo para vocês, se alguém tiver alguma pergunta. No questions? Okay. So, I have a couple. Ito, okay, go ahead.
No, Thais, she asked something in the chat.
Thais is putting something in the chat here, and relating to, I thought Thais is asking, Thais, go ahead, please, open up your microphone and make the question directly, please.
Hello. Okay. Thank you very much. That was a very nice class. I was wondering about the period that he was in crisis, and it wasn't very clear to me as to why he was thinking that once you have faith, the evil consequences of your karma will be eliminated. Like, I thought that it was pretty clear on the sutras that you still face the consequences of your actions. You know, salvation is only in the afterlife. So I would like to know your opinion about salvation happening only in the afterlife, or if it's possible to happen here and now according to the sutras? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question. Akirasu's understanding was mistaken, and very clearly not in line with the sutras, and really not in line with Shinran's thought. Although there are, yes, not. I actually have a feeling that part of his misunderstanding was brought about by his grasp of Christianity and his sort of conflation between Christian salvation and Buddhist salvation. You know, Shinran very much denies the idea that somehow we will, through our good actions, we will be, how do you say, granted rewards for our good actions. But Shinran also, he talks about how we receive merits or virtues through the working of the name, such that, you know, and this is something, through the wisdom, wisdom that is contained in the message Namo Amida Butsu, we are given an insight that will transform evil into good. This is, Shinran talks about how the name is the right wisdom that can transform our evil actions or our evil karma into virtue or into good karma. And this is not that it will change the results of those actions. Akigarasu still had to take responsibility for his actions, right? Akigarasu was still very much responsible for the results of everything that he did. However, in this new insight, in his new and correct insight, those various evil actions were transformed into, I guess we could say, meaningful actions, right? Meaningful and necessary actions that led to this deeper insight. For me, personally, when I was younger, I was very much a drunkard, right? And very much created a great deal of problems for myself and my family and my friends based on, drinking way too much all the time. And that was, at the time, that was only hurtful, right? That was only painful and only hurtful to myself and to others, and so at the time was evil. However, now I can look back on that hurtful, evil action and see it as, in a sense, meaningful and necessary for my life today, for what I am right now. And it's that transformative recognition, this idea that I am the devil and that my actions, my behaviors, my limited hurtful behaviors, are can be meaningful, right? Even though they're limited and hurtful. That in there is, I think, this liberation. But the way that, you know, Akegarasu, the way that Shinran talks about it is that it's a single moment of awakening. He says that it's a single moment, ichinen, one thought moment, a single moment of awakening, such that one can have that single moment of enlightenment or awakening, but once I start talking about it, once I start saying it in using my mind, right, using my self-justifying mind to talk about it, that moment of awakening becomes, how do you say, a moment of self-justification, right? Which moves it away from genuine awakening. That you know, oh ignorance. I can go so far as to say, oh ignorance, I am the devil. And in that awakening, there is liberation, and there is light in that awakening. But when I start saying, I have attained this awakening, and it's okay for me to be limited and hurtful, then that falls into the realm of self-justification and the realm of, how do you say, making excuses for myself. And that moment of awakening is different and needs to be seen as different from the making excuses for oneself. And it's that moment of awakening that is really our only liberation. It's that moment of insight, that moment of recognition that everything is okay. that is, and so, and there's no need then, if we can have that insight repeatedly in our lives, then there's no need for us to expect or wish for some sort of a liberation in an afterlife, or some sort of a freedom in an afterlife, or some sort of a transmutation in an afterlife. I don't know. I feel like this could be the topic of about 5 lectures itself. But
okay, thank you very much. I get it.
Indeed. Just for the rest of 4 minutes, if it's possible, I'd like to understand, not to understand, but I'd like you to talk a little more about the impact of the Double Kai movement to our order, and why it was refused by the Honzan in the first place, and then was accepted after. Was the sensation in my mind was that because the debts of the Honzan after war, that was solved by the movement, and I'd like to understand if this had a strong participation in the decision to accept the Double Kai movement. Can you establish this relationship, please?
Well, it's kind of a complex. Akegarasu started this fellowship lifestyle movement in 1951, and the Double Kai movement didn't really begin until 1961. And so there's sort of a decade of, how do you say, going back and forth and negotiation within the denomination. But I think that we can say mainly by the 1950s, there was a great deal of resistance to Kiyozawa and a great deal of resistance to Akegarasu and Soga in the 1920s and 30s. But by the 1950s, there was a generational change where most of the ministers in the denomination had been educated at the Otani University created by Kiyozawa. And most of the ministers generally shared sort of the ideas that Kiyozawa had set forth, this understanding, this more modernistic doctrinal understanding. And in terms of doctrine, and in terms of the centrality of Kiyozawa's ideas and the centrality of this new Otaniha doctrinal studies, that was fairly easy to bring about. That by the mid-1950s, that became sort of the central policy of the denomination. But in terms of organization, in terms of the organizational reform, the Dobokai movement really continues to struggle to this day to recognize and to complete its goals, even though it's 50 years old. The ideal of the Dobokai movement to shift to a sort of faith-based individual membership system is something that is still in process of being realized. And it's kind of a complex situation, mainly related to the way that temples currently make money, and the way that the Dobokai movement envisioned that temples should make money, because now, and really since the Edo period, temples are set up based on funerals. They make their money on funerals and on memorial services, whereas the Dobokai movement argues that that sort of a financial basis is not best, and that a faith-based movement, a membership system is better. And so really, from my perspective, the Dobokai movement that got set up in the 1960s is still in process and is still very much has not realized its goals. Although doctrinally it became the ideas of Akegarasu and Soga and Kaneko and Kiyozawa did become central. Okay. And this could also be another hour lecture.
Yes, yeah, thank you very much.
And I do.
I think, please, I don't want to make you late. I know you haven't. Yes. We are running out of time. So yes. I'd like to thank you very much for this. This is very, very, very good for us because this is generating a lot of talking after the lectures. So we will exchange emails to set the new date for the next one. But I believe that we need to make a pause because we have the July and then we have August that we are. At least me and you are going to US for the Dobokai. So
right. Yes, I think we will need to take a few months off, but I really appreciate everybody's attention. And again, I sincerely apologize for oversleeping this morning. I'm very sorry to keep you waiting. But I very much appreciate the attention, and I look forward to the next chance I have to talk to everyone.
Okay, Sensei, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
See you in the US.
Okay, see you. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.